The Krell Dominion Armada dropped out of warp space in a perfectly synchronized formation. 700 vessels arranged like a spear tip aimed at the blue-white orb below. Commander Threx stood on the observation deck of the flagship Sovereign Ascension, his scaled hands clasped behind his back, tasting the copper tang of recycled atmosphere. The planet was designated Sol 3, known locally as Earth, a Category 4 deathworld according to the old galactic classifications: high gravity, aggressive microbiota, unstable tectonics. Nothing the Krell hadn't handled before. "Broadcast the proclamation," Threx ordered, his voice a low rumble through the cranial translator. "Standard ultimatum, total submission, resource tribute, integration into the Dominion." The communications officer, a junior named Sivath, keyed the wideband transmission. The message rolled out across every frequency, a demand for unconditional surrender repeated in 17 trade languages and the dominant local tongue. The Krell had perfected this moment over 43 successful conquests. The pattern was immutable: orbital shock, psychological paralysis, then ground occupation before the natives could organize a coherent defense. Silence stretched for 11 seconds. Then a single voice answered, male, calm, stripped of all inflection. "Understood." Sivath's head crest flared with confusion. No negotiation, no pleas, just confirmation. Threx felt an unfamiliar twitch in his throat sac. "Trace the origin." "Multiple relay nodes across the Northern Hemisphere, Commander. Civilian infrastructure. It's automated. A recorded loop." The Armada's strategic display showed lander craft detaching from troop carriers, descending toward key population centers: New York, London, Beijing, Sao Paulo. Sensor sweeps returned odd data. Thermal signatures were minimal, power grids operating at standby, transportation networks frozen. Cities looked evacuated, but there was no mass migration pattern, no refugee columns. It was as if the humans had simply vanished into the terrain. "They've gone to ground," Threx said, reassuring himself. "Prey always hides. Begin Phase 2. The first wave of Krell shock troops touched down in the financial district of what the humans called New York. Their armored boots crushed shattered glass as they advanced between towers of steel and concrete, head-mounted weapons sweeping for targets. Nothing moved. Then the screens came alive. Every advertisement board, every building display, every abandoned personal device lit up with the same video feed. It showed human history, not their achievements but their massacres. Piles of bodies from wars called world, genocide camps, chemical attacks on their own kind, nuclear firestorms devouring cities. The montage played in a continuous, silent loop, overlaid with a single line of text: "Welcome to Earth." Squad leader Kolith halted his unit. "What is this? Psychological warfare?" Before anyone could answer, the street beneath them buckled. A gravitational lens mine, buried 3 meters under asphalt, activated. For 2 brutal seconds, local gravity inverted at 200 GS, crushing the squad upward into a mangled smear of chitin and alloy before snapping back and flattening the remains. The explosion was soundless, invisible, and absolute. Kolith's vital signs flatlined on the command net. Threx watched the feed cut out from a dozen landing zones, replaced by static or worse, the looping video now overlaid with Krell casualty reports. His claws dug into the console rim. "Recall all ground units. Immediate orbit." But the recall signal was already being jammed by a counter-transmission from the surface, a woman's voice this time, soft and almost apologetic. "You came a long way just to die in our dirt. We'll make it quick. That's more than you'd have done for us." Threx stared at the planet turning below, its cloud-swept face now utterly alien. He had conquered deathworlds before. This was different. This was not a fight. This was an invitation to a slaughterhouse, and the Krell had walked in willingly. Vecrus had survived 17 planetary invasions, his scales scarred and his crest half-torn from a campaign against the Tavari citadels. He'd killed prey that screamed, prey that fought, prey that bargained. Sao Paulo was none of those. The city was a corpse, its high-rises gutted, its streets empty except for the occasional wind-blown wrapper and the distant rumble of the swarm. That silver death they still didn't understand. But that wasn't here yet. Here, in the southern districts, the Krell still held ground and Vecrus was hunting. His squad moved in staggered formation through a favela, shacks stacked like discarded shells. Thermal scans showed a single human heat signature in a concrete bunker ahead. A survivor, maybe intelligence. Vecrus signaled breach and capture. They found the human sitting cross-legged on a dirt floor, a thin man with sunken cheeks and a calm that bordered on religious. He wore no armor, carried no visible weapon. His hands rested palms up on his knees. "You will tell us where the rest of your kind are hiding," Vecrus growled through his translator. The man looked up and his lips curled, not a grin but a recognition. "You walked into the wrong house." Vecrus's threat sensors screamed a millisecond before the man's chest cavity detonated. The phosphorus charge, surgically implanted where a human heart had once been, turned the bunker into an incandescent furnace. 4 Krell soldiers vaporized instantly. Vecrus, thrown backward by the blast, slammed through a corrugated wall and lay stunned, his armor cooking, his left arm a charred ruin. The man was gone, reduced to a biological mist that coated the rubble with a fine, greasy soot. Medical drones extracted Vecrus minutes later. As they dragged him to an evac shuttle, he saw something that cracked his warrior's mind. A Krell field hospital 3 blocks away had been poisoned at the water purification point, not with a simple toxin, but with a tailored prion that turned drinking water into a slow-acting neural shredder. Soldiers who had hydrated an hour ago were now convulsing, raking out their own eyes, their screams a chorus that harmonized with the distant, looping children's laughter broadcast from hidden speakers. The humans weren't just fighting. They were sculpting an environment of terror. Every corpse was a trap, every utility a weapon, every sound a misdirection. The prey had become the architect of a maze where every path led to a different kind of dying. Vecrus, floating in a medical gel aboard a troop transport, replayed the man's last words in his mind. "You walked into the wrong house." Not a boast, a statement of fact. The entire planet was that house, and the Krell were trespassers who hadn't read the warning scratched into the walls. Above, Commander Threx received Vecrus's debrief and stared at the casualty figures spiraling upward. Ground operations had suffered 62% fatalities in just 18 hours. For context, the entire conquest of the Tavari homeworld had cost 8%. The Krell Dominion was bleeding out on a world that should have been a footnote, and the worst part was the silence. No demands from human leadership, no negotiation. Just a slow, methodical dismantling of an invasion force that had never considered the possibility that it might be the victim. Threx made a decision that twisted his stomach. Authorize orbital bombardment on all landing zones. Sterilize the grid coordinates. We'll glass the sites and dig out survivors later. The order went out, kinetic rods dropped, and the swarm rose to meet them. Lena Vasquez had a piece of shrapnel lodged 2 centimeters from her spine, a broken tibia, and a Krell neural probe drilling into her temporal lobe. She didn't scream. The Krell interrogator, a specialist named Atrax, found that disturbing. Most subjects lost coherence within minutes. This human female, her dark eyes bloodshot but focused, simply breathed through the pain and counted the drops of her own sweat falling onto the metal floor. The defense mechanism, Atrax pressed, increasing the synaptic extraction current. What activated when we entered orbit? Your archives call it something. Tell me. Lena's voice came out shredded but clear. Reaper protocol, autonomous, triggered the moment your FTL signature broke the UIT perimeter. No off switch, no recall. It's a dead man's switch for a dead species, ironic since we're not dead yet. Atrax's crest flattened. Explain the swarm. Quantum-locked nanites, invisible until they start disassembly. They've been dormant in the upper atmosphere for 70 years, waiting. They identify non-human biology by molecular chirality. Your proteins are left-handed, same as ours, but your cellular markers are all wrong. To the swarm, you're just cancer. Lena coughed, blood speckling her lip. And cancer gets cut out. The facility's alarm klaxons erupted. Atrax spun to the monitoring screens and watched as the perimeter sensors began failing in a creeping wave. The swarm, until now an abstract horror from other sectors, had reached their position. A Krell guard posted at the corridor intersection suddenly collapsed into a pile of fine gray powder, his armor clattering empty to the ground. The nanites didn't buzz or glow. They were silent, a death that moved like a shadow cast by nothing. Lena used the distraction. Her restraints were designed for Krell physiology. The locking mechanism assumed a limb joint rotation impossible for Krell anatomy, but human shoulders could dislocate. With a wet pop, she wrenched her arm free, jammed the neural probe into Atrax's throat, and rolled off the table as he fell gurgling. She hobbled toward the exit, her broken leg screaming, and grabbed a Krell sidearm. The corridor was a tableau of dissolving soldiers, their bodies collapsing into fine dust even as they tried to run. Commander Threx from orbit connected to the base's external cameras and saw his forward command post being erased. Not exploded, not burned, unmade molecule by molecule. The silver tide swept through barricades, ignored plasma bolts, absorbed a self-destruct grenade and simply reconstituted afterward. And at the edge of the carnage, a lone human figure limped away, pausing only to look up at the camera drone. Lena Vasquez raised the Krell weapon in a mocking salute, and then vanished into the smoke. Threx's bridge crew waited for orders. None came. The commander, who had crushed civilizations, who had executed cowardly officers personally, stood paralyzed. The swarm had crossed 40 kilometers of jungle to reach that base in under an hour, and it was accelerating. The planet wasn't defending itself. It was digesting them. And the human woman's face, tired and broken but utterly unyielding, told him a truth he'd refused to accept. The Krell hadn't invaded a world. They poked a wound that had learned to scar over with razor wire. The feed hit the galactic network like a supernova. Human InfoWar specialists, operating from buried bunkers, had sliced into the Krell battlenet and were routing every death, every disintegration, every panicked retreat to every unsecured receiver within 500 light-years. The Tavari High Council saw Commander Threx's face freeze in horror. The Xylian Assembly watched a Krell dreadnought attempt a low-orbit sterilization burst, only for the swarm to ride the thermal updraft and consume the firing batteries in 60 seconds. The Myrio Collective, a race that had never known war, witnessed a species weaponizing its own ecosystem, its own history, its own bodies. The voice that overrode all channels was female, steady, and carried the weight of someone reading a grocery list rather than pronouncing doom. This is a recording. The Reaper protocol has reached full saturation in Earth's upper atmosphere and is now self-replicating using your fleet's alloy as substrate. We estimate swarm mass will reach critical interstellar mobility within 6 standard cycles. You will exit Sol completely by then. If any Krell vessel remains, the swarm will attach and follow your FTL wake back to your colonies. We will not negotiate. We will not accept surrender. You came for a harvest. You found a furnace. Burn or leave, your choice. The Krell High Council, assembled in the Crystal Spire on the capital world of Krellos, watched in real time as the Sovereign Ascension attempted to comply. Threx ordered full retreat, but the swarm had already infiltrated 15 ships, dormant until the FTL drive spooled. When those ships attempted to jump, the nanites triggered, not consuming the vessels, but fusing their navigation cores into locked coordinates aimed at the nearest star. 4 ships translated directly into a red giant, their matter converted to plasma before a single distress call could finish. The rest of the fleet scattered like panicked insects, and the swarm simply waited, a shimmering veil stretching from low orbit to the moon's trailing Lagrange point, patient and eternal. The broadcast ended with a single image, Earth from space, wreathed in a faint silver mist that hadn't been there days before. Below it text, "Welcome to Earth. Come again." The galaxy, which had watched the Krell Dominion swallow systems without consequence, now witnessed the Dominion choke on something it couldn't digest. Species that had trembled in the shadow of Krell expansion began sending encrypted messages to one another, a flurry of diplomatic panic. The question wasn't whether the Krell would fall. They were already collapsing as subject worlds revolted. The question was what humanity would do next. The furnace had been lit. Would it stay contained? Commander Threx, adrift in an escape pod with a handful of survivors, replayed the broadcast on a loop, searching for a lie he couldn't find. The human woman's voice didn't gloat. It simply stated facts. That lack of emotion, that absolute indifference to the scale of death they'd inflicted, was the most horrifying thing he'd ever encountered. The Dominion had conquered with fury and pride. Humanity defended with clinical precision, a surgery that had no patient, only a pathology to excise. And Threx understood at last that some monsters don't need to roar. They just need to finish the job. Alexei Morozov had never set foot in the Galactic Assembly's grand chamber. His hologram flickered slightly, a concession to bandwidth limitations, but his presence dominated the circular hall. Rows of delegates from 37 species watched him with a mixture of terror and fascination. The human was unassuming, gray hair, tired eyes, a plain black uniform with no insignia. He placed a small, matte black cylinder on the projection dais, its surface so perfectly non-reflective it seemed to swallow the ambient light. "This is a trigger," Alexei said, his voice carrying through translators without inflection. "A single-use initiation key for a false vacuum collapse device. We built 12 of them during our last internal war. The project was called Nightfall. It renders a volume of spacetime approximately 400 cubic light-years into a lower energy state permanently. The bubble propagates at light speed. You can't outrun it. You can't shield against it. Physics just ends." The Tevari Elder, a being of elongated crystalline thought strands, rose from his seat. "You would annihilate reality itself to win a war." Alexei tilted his head. "We would annihilate reality to ensure no one ever wins a war against us. There's a difference. We don't want territory, we don't want tribute, we want to be left alone. The Reaper Protocol is our active defense. Nightfall is our final argument. There are others, but I'm not authorized to disclose them." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "The Krell thought our home was just another death world. They were wrong. Earth is a death world that created a death species. We have killed ourselves in numbers that exceed your total population 20 times over, and we're still here. What made you think you could succeed where we failed?" The Krell delegation, a haggard remnant of the once proud Dominion, sat in a cordoned-off section under armed guard. Their acting speaker, a former governor named Jaron who had been promoted by default after the High Council's execution by their own people, stood on trembling legs. "The Dominion offers unconditional surrender. We beg the human polity to halt the swarm's advance. It has already reached 4 colony worlds. Billions are at risk." Alexei didn't look at him. "The swarm is no longer under our direct control. It's following its original programming: seek and neutralize Krell biosphere contamination. It will stop when Krell genetic markers no longer exist outside the Sol exclusion zone. We didn't design it with an off switch because we knew that's the first thing an enemy would try to find. You wanted to see what humanity keeps in its basement. Now you know. It's a mirror. Whatever you bring to our door, it reflects back amplified." The Xylian delegate, Nissa's progenitor, a being of shifting chromatophore patterns, transmitted a thought query directly to Alexei's neural implant. "Are you a monster?" Alexei's response was silent but clear. "I'm a parent who buried a child during the Fomalhaut raids 30 years ago. My daughter was 8, Krell strafing run. They didn't even know she was there. They weren't aiming at her, she was just in the way. I volunteered for this assignment because I wanted to look the Krell in the eye and tell them what we became because of them. So no, I'm not a monster, I'm a consequence." The chamber fell into a hush as the weight of that silent exchange rippled through the telepathic species. The Tevari Elder's thought strands dimmed. Jaren's legs finally gave out, and he collapsed into his seat, the sound of his scaled body hitting the cushion, the only punctuation to humanity's closing argument. The Sol Accord was signed under the light of a dying star in the NCG 4414 nebula, a location chosen for its symbolic neutrality and lack of strategic value. The document, drafted by human legal AIs and translated into every known language, was brutally simple: a permanent exclusion zone of 100 light-years around Sol. No military vessels, no probes, no colonists. The swarm would remain dormant but present, its detection grid extended by a network of stealthed platforms humanity had deployed during the final hours of the invasion. Any breach would trigger an automatic response sequence: first the swarm, then strategic bioweapons, then nightfall. Representatives from the galactic community signed one by one. The Tavari appended a rider, a formal acknowledgement of humanity's classification upgrade from pre-FTL Deathworld species to Class 0 existential threat, a designation previously reserved for theoretical self-replicating doomsday mechanisms. The Krell remnant signed with the desperate relief of a species granted a stay of execution. Their dominion was already dissolved, their colonies either consumed or under quarantine. Billions of Krell had died, not from human cruelty, but from the sheer indiscriminate efficiency of a defense system built by a species that had learned the hard way that mercy was a tactical weakness. Alexei Morozov didn't attend. He'd been recalled to Earth, his diplomatic function complete. The signatory for humanity was a woman named Mira Okonkwo, a retired captain who had lost her left arm during the initial orbital bombardment. She used her prosthetic to steady the document as she signed, the artificial fingers clicking softly. Afterward, she addressed the assembly without a prepared speech. "You're all afraid of the swarm. You're afraid of nightfall. You're afraid of whatever else we might have hidden. Good, that's the point. But I want you to understand something deeper. Every weapon we built because someone tried to kill us. The swarm exists because the Krell existed. Nightfall exists because we almost used it on ourselves a century ago, and we kept it as a reminder of what we're capable of. Humanity's true weapon isn't technology, it's memory. We remember every invasion, every genocide, every child vaporized in a raid. And we refuse to forget. That's the fear you should carry. Not that we'll destroy you, but that we will outlast you, and we will teach our grandchildren exactly what you did, and they'll be ready." She set down the pen and swept her gaze across the silent delegates. "The exclusion zone is not a prison for us. It's a warning for you. Stay out. Live your lives. Forget about Earth if you can, because if you force us to remember again, we will, and the next accord won't need signatures, just a eulogy." The recording of that speech became the most viewed document in galactic history within a single cycle. In every polity, the same question echoed: what kind of species turns trauma into a planetary immune system? And the answer, whispered from Tavari archives to Xylian study groups, was always the same: one that has been hurt so deeply, so repeatedly, that pain became its primary fuel, and healing was never an option. NIS's research vessel, Curious Drift, hovered at the exact boundary of the Sol exclusion zone, its passive sensors drinking in the faint silver shimmer that marked the swarm's perimeter. The young Xylian had spent years studying humanity from afar, compiling every scrap of data, every intercepted transmission, every leaked Krell after-action report. Now, at the edge of forbidden space, he hoped to understand something beyond the fear. The human patrol ship materialized from stealth with a ripple of displaced photons, a blocky vessel bristling with weapon pods that tracked NIS's ship with lazy precision. A communication request flickered on his console. He accepted. Captain Mira Okonkwo appeared on screen, older than in the Accord recordings, her hair completely white, her prosthetic arm polished but showing signs of field repair. Her expression wasn't hostile. Weary, perhaps, curious. "You're the 10th researcher this year," she said. "Most turn back before I have to do this. You're persistent, I'll give you that." Nis's chromatophores rippled with a mix of anxiety and excitement. I'm not here to cross the boundary, Captain. I want to ask a question. One question. Then I'll leave. Mira leaned back in her command chair. Ask. Do you regret it? The Reaper Protocol, the billions of Krell, the galaxy's fear, any of it? The pause that followed was not hesitation. It was the weight of a species settling into a chair made of old grief. Mira's eyes, dark and deep, held a reflection of something Nis couldn't name. I had a son, she said finally. His name was Idris. He was 12 when the Krell bombarded our evacuation convoy. He wasn't a soldier. He was a boy who liked drawing pictures of alien sunsets. He'd never seen one, but he imagined them. Beautiful things. When his shuttle took a direct hit, I was on a command deck 300 clicks away, listening to his life sign monitor flatline. I couldn't even hold his hand. Nis's chromatophores dimmed to a mournful blue. I grieve with you. Don't. Mira's voice sharpened, then softened. I'm telling you this because you asked about regret. Regret is a luxury for species that haven't had to bury their children in mass graves, not because of some natural disaster, but because someone in a distant star system decided they had the right to take everything. I regret that Idris never saw his alien sunset. I regret that I never got to see him grow old. But I do not regret what we did to the Krell. Not one atomic disassembly. Not one screaming soldier, because every Krell that died meant one less parent losing their child somewhere else. You call it fear. I call it protection. She stood, walking closer to the visual pickup. The galaxy learned true fear the day they invaded Earth, but it's not fear of the swarm or the bombs or the plague vaults we haven't opened. It's fear of the fact that we will do it again, without pause, without moral hand-wringing. We are a species that looked into the abyss and discovered we could dig it deeper, and we will every single time to keep our children safe. That's the monster you're afraid of, not a beast, a parent with nothing left to lose. Nis terminated the transmission after a long silence, his report writing itself in his mind. He transmitted a final log to the Xylian archives before turning his ship around. The message was short, echoing through the databases of 100 civilizations. Humanity's true weapon is not their technology. It is their capacity to endure loss and transform it into unbreakable resolve. They have paid a price for survival that no other known species would willingly pay. Do not mistake their isolation for weakness. Do not mistake their silence for peace. They are not waiting to die. They are waiting to be left alone. And if we fail that simple request, there will be no second accord. Only a silence where we used to be. The curious drift slipped into FTL, and behind it the silver shimmer of Earth's guardian swarm continued its eternal vigil, a quiet testament to a species that had turned its scars into a shield. The galaxy went on, but every child born after that day learned the same lesson before they learned to speak. There is a star named Sol. Never go there. The humans are home, and they remember everything.